All right, welcome back to My Life, Sam Radford. This week we have an iconic guest. His name is Large from Barstool. He hosts several podcasts on Barstool, formerly hosted a breakfast radio show. Uh, his two main ones that are big are Twisted History and the Podfathers. Twisted History, I'm a huge fan of. They delve into topics all over the world and all through time and speak on every single thing you can think of, from the good, the bad, the ugly, and in between. His name is also Michael McCarthy. I don't know if he wants his government name out there or not, but he could be Michael McCarthy at any part of the United States. But yeah, welcome, Large. Thank you.
Oh, you're welcome. Yeah, it's a pleasure to be on. I don't mind doing this kind of stuff at all. And sometimes when I do it, people I do it with are like, "Oh, it's really nice for you to do it." And I was like, I don't mind talking to nice people. To be honest, maybe it's a hassle. If you're Dan, or obviously if you're Dave, or if you're KFC or some of the bigger guys, but me being, still one of the newer guys there, I'm 2.5 years at Barstool. I don't have that big of a social following. It's so much bigger than it was before I got there. So I'd like to think that I have more of a social interaction with people who follow me than some of the other, you know, Rushmore guys. I think they're called the big Rushmore guys, like Dan and those guys, you know?
Oh yeah, I remember one time back in the day, I tried messaging Dan saying I'd fight to be able to get on with his show, but I don't think he ever read it. But you're more than a Mount Rushmore to me, my friend. So Large has quite a history. He's now with Barstool hosting podcasts, but he grew up in Brooklyn before Brooklyn was hipsterville. He worked at the stock market for over 25 years. He was in the building during 9/11 when it happened, and lived in it real life, and as one of the most honest and personable stories I've ever heard about it, because you watch so many things about 9/11. But I just want to start off with, what was it like growing up in Brooklyn when you did?
My mom and dad are both from the other side. My mom's from Dublin. My dad's from Cork. So my dad came over by boat when he was 19 by himself. My mom came over when she was 15 with her family. And the Irish back then kind of settled in the Bronx or in Brooklyn. My dad in the Bronx, my mom in Brooklyn, met at like a school dance. So I was actually born in the Bronx on Fordham Road and in an apartment. And once they decided to get a house, they got it in this little shanty neighborhood on the ass end of Brooklyn. Coney Island is probably the most recognizable part of Brooklyn by me. Then there's a smaller neighborhood called Sheepshead Bay. Then next to Sheepshead Bay, there's an even smaller neighborhood called Garrettson Beach. And Garrettson Beach back then was all Irish. It was like this little thing, and they were almost like bungalows, like beach houses, like a breezy point, which some people know about, which is actually in Queens. So growing up in there, I had a lot of Irish Americans around me, but we were still like 2 blocks away from housing projects. Like it was a real melting pot. And then a huge Italian neighborhood, just a stone's throw away, huge Russian neighborhood at the end of Sheepshead Bay going into. So it really was. It was like a conglomerate that I think helped me socially, help my palate, as far as going to all these different restaurants and stuff. Where I was in Brooklyn now, my parents are still there. It's not as good. I'd gotten out. I lived in Bay Ridge, Brooklyn, after we'd gotten married for 22 years this year. And then once we started having kids, we moved up to northern New Jersey. And we go back quite a bit. Like my kids love Brooklyn. My middle son in particular, he does a summer job. He's 13 years old, but he does a summer job as a plumber's assistant in Brooklyn, because my wife's aunt owns a plumbing supply store. So my Brooklyn ties are still thick, and I lost the accent. My older brother has a real heavy Brooklyn accent. My younger brother has a real heavy Brooklyn accent. They're two big guys, like, strong. And I had it, but then I went away to college. I went to college in Indiana, and I came back without the Brooklyn accent. I don't know. I get it when I'm mad, I guess. So it's an integral part of my upbringing, Brooklyn. I went to school on the Lower East Side of Manhattan. So it was like an hour and 15 minutes by train both ways. That's an integral part of my upbringing, because the Lower East Side, back when Dinkins was mayor, was not what the Lower East Side is today. It was a real shithole. So I think all those things, even though I seem maybe silver spoonish or maybe born on a third base type thing to some people who don't know me, I grew up in old school Brooklyn, and that's what made me such close friends with Willie Colon. So when Willie Colon, who had played in 2 Super Bowls, won 1 Super Bowl with the Steelers, and played with the Jets as an offensive lineman, 10 years in the NFL. We had hosted Barstool Breakfast together for 2 years, and then we didn't renew the Sirius deal. Barstool didn't. But Willie is half black, half Puerto Rican from the Bronx, and he's a fucking monster. Like, Willie's a monster. He's got those canned ham arms, and he's branded. He's got but not the brand like me. You might have a little smiley face. He's got 2 fucking Omegas, but we have such an old school New York sensibility to us that we love the same thing. And just kind of, you know what I mean? Like, when you make that connection. I just interviewed a boxer today by the name of Edgar Berlanga, and he's a Brooklyn, Puerto Rican kid. I did the interview, and he was in a barber's chair getting his fade done. And he's like, "I'll be done in a second." I was like, "I got to be honest with you. I don't mind interviewing a Puerto Rican from New York City in a barber's chair before he goes and fights. He's going for 17-0. It's 17 straight first round knockouts." I'm like, that's kind of Hector Camacho-ish. It's kind of Miguel Cotto-ish, like old school New York. So that's what I think about when I think of Brooklyn or New York and stuff like that. What it's turned into is a little different. People say I'm very negative on New York sometimes. New York has become very unfriendly and expensive and dirty and all that kind of stuff. So, it all depends on the time frame. But I'm turning 50 this year. So to give you some sort of historical preference, some historical idea of when I was kind of floating around. So I've kind of seen how New York and whatnot has changed throughout the ages.
Well, one funny fact, I guess you'll say, for changes of the times, because I don't think you'll have this as much. It could be happening. I could just not know. But I know that you got incarcerated at, I think, age 7 for hitting a police officer.
I was arrested in the 7th grade.
In the 7th grade. Sorry, the 7th grade. I was over exaggerating.
Yeah.
Imagine that.
7 years old is, so 7th grade, I guess. What are you in 7th grade? I think
9 years old.
I think it was, no, you're so 8th grade.
Oh yeah.
So you're going into high school. So I was 12. I was 12 years old. Yeah. I'd gotten drunk for the first time, and in an enclosed U-shaped schoolyard, with only one exit in and out. So when the cops came in to bust all these kids, I was beyond. And I took a swing at an officer, and I landed a wet sponge, and they threw me in the car. I'd ran away and passed out in the street, obstructing traffic and assaulting an officer. And then they put me in the cage. This is Brooklyn again. I had a nameplate on that said Michael, the Playboy Bunny, and a diamond chip. I had an initial ring that had M. And they asked me my name. I said, it's John Fitzgerald, and perjury. And so they put me in the cage overnight. And it's because when I was 12, I was probably 6'1".
Oh, wow.
Yeah. And so, I started crying and throwing up, but I still spent the night. I spent the night in the 61st precinct on Coney Island Avenue when I was in 7th grade. So yeah, that's another thing, right? Like I have kids. My daughter just turned 11. My middle guy is about to turn 14 in a couple of weeks. My older guy is about to turn 17 in a couple of weeks. And so like I try to get across to them and be as honest as possible. I'm like, by the way, I know you guys are going to start doing some stuff. Know that I've done this. And, like it worked out well, because so often now, again, kids don't know what the consequences are for their actions. And some kids don't care about consequences. My guys happen to have a degree of empathy and whatnot, that I want them to know that everything's going to be okay. Like, I got the shit kicked out of me when I got home, and my dad will tell you that. I'm not a big hitter of the kids or anything, but still. So I was like, I spent the night in prison when I was 12. You guys are already by there, so you win. You know what I mean? So if somebody gets pregnant or a car gets wrecked, or you get drunk, or you try some drugs or something like that, we can work it out, and that's a big part of my persona at Barstool. Is the Podfathers that I do with Clem, which I had asked to be part of. And so you talk about making lemonade. Kevin Clancy, KFC, who's the Rushmore guy. When I was coming into the firm, Kevin had just gotten caught cheating on his wife. And Kevin was one of the guys that's always done Podfathers, the parenting podcast, along with Clem. And so Kevin's like, I feel hypocritical about this. I don't, do you want to do it? Because Kevin's the reason I'm at Barstool. So I just started this. And by the way, there's a guy, Clem, who's at Barstool, who is the nicest fucking guy in the world. You couldn't ask for a better guy. So we did that. And so 2 years later, I'm still doing that. That's a parenting podcast. Clem has younger kids. I have older kids, and we have all these guests on and shit, not all that. So the parenting part is something that I'm pretty open with, pretty vocal with and whatnot.
Yeah. And actually, you mentioned Clem and KFC getting you into Barstool. So as I mentioned before Large was involved in this part of a career or life, he was in the stock market and everything. But towards the end of his career in the stock market, if I'm correct, he was writing these almost blogs centered around that. And it's before blogging was very big, but he was getting lots of hits. And Barstool tried hiring him, I think, almost 10 years prior or less than 10 years prior to when he eventually did go with Barstool.
Yeah, you're close. Yeah. So 2007, 2006, 7, and 8, maybe within that time, I used to write a blog called Take a Report. And I was, I think, a director at the time or something, senior vice president or something at Citigroup. I was a block trader at Citigroup. And it was just like a lifestyle blog. There were no blogs back then. There was no cloud back then. So you can't find my blogs. And I have thousands of them. So some guy's like, if you want to start this thing, I want to try and do blogs. Guy I don't know. He's a friend of a friend on a desk. Just write down some thoughts and I'll put it up. Give me $400. I'll make the skin and we'll go with it. So I did that. He did that with 5 other guys. The other 5 guys didn't get any hits. And all of a sudden mine had picked up steam, like as a voice of the people type thing. And the next thing you know, it was like, 250,000 hits a day or something like that. So Kevin Clancy was a big fan of mine. And he was just starting to, he had mentioned it to Dave. Kevin wasn't hired yet. So it was 2008, I believe. And so David asked me to meet him. He said, I'll fly up to Boston. I said, you can't fly me up to Boston. I'm an officer in a thing. I go to Boston quite often, visit customers. So while I was up in Boston, one thing, I carved out some time. I met Dave, balding, heavyset guy. Was almost living out of a van at the time. His business was basically giving out magazines of where the clubs were being and stuff like that. Barstool Sports was in its fucking infancy. And this guy had said, would you like to be Barstool New York? I was like, I don't even know what the fuck Barstool Boston is. Like you don't seem to have that structure, but he had this grandiose plan and it was kind of attractive, but I was like, I'm going to have to pass. I'm just blogging. You know what I mean? Like, and I'm at a bulge bracket bank. You fast forward 2008, fucking financial crisis, the stock that was delivered to me at 35 went to like 2. And then I start bouncing around the street for a while. And you fast forward even more, 10 years later, I get laid off from a job. And when I get laid off from the job, I had 2 other jobs immediately lined up that were similar to the one that I just left. Small little differences, but basically same industry. And then Kevin Clancy, who the only reason he's working at Barstool is because I turned down Barstool New York. He had said to me, I heard that you were laid off because we have friends in common or whatever. I'd never met the guy. I'd met him once. He was at a fundraiser of mine. So I shook his hand outside of a men's room. It's like, why don't you come in and do like a podcast or something with me? Just sit in on my podcast where this guy fights. And then sit in on a radio show with this guy, Trent and Riggs, I think, with 2 guys at the time. I went in and I did 2 hours of radio with him. Next day I came back and I did a podcast with him and fights. Never been in front of when I was in college, I was a DJ in college. I used to spin records. So he's like, that was fantastic. He said, he's like, you still writing? I'm like, I'm not writing, but no, I'm not publishing anything, for 10 years. So he put me in front of Dave. This is 10 years later. And Dave's like, you want to write for us? Just write. And I'll pay you such amount of money. Not an embarrassing small amount of money, but a lot smaller than what I would have had at these Wall Street jobs. I said, oh, okay. So I went to my wife. I said, I have this macro place, this other place in Barstool. She said, if we won the lottery, would you go to the macro or the other place? I said, no. She's like, would you go to Barstool? I said, yeah. She's like, why don't you try it for a year? So I did. And then within the year, I redid a 3-year deal, which rolls off next year. So at the very least, I'll be peddling this smut until I'm into my 50s. And then if I stick around or if they decide to go younger, if they decide to go in a different direction, I don't know. I would love to stay here for a while. This is the best job I've ever had. The best job I've ever had. And I started with just writing, right? Which is my strong suit. It's tougher to write nowadays because political correctness, you can put stuff into the ether on podcasts and radio shows, and it's not as much of a receipt as if you put it down on a fucking blog. So then it branched out to radio, branched out to podcast. I'm the de facto NASCAR guy now. I picked up that mantle. I'm the de facto boxing guy because I've always been a boxing guy. And I'm one of the de facto food guys. So you find your little niche, which I guess we'll talk about a little bit in a little while, and you kind of run with it at Barstool. And that's where I am. So history, parenting, boxing, food, NASCAR, and then just like today I wrote a blog, it's, 1,500 words on the top 10 women that Prince had banged because today's the 5-year anniversary of Prince's death. So I have that, that randomness to me also. And I'm having the fucking time of my life.
Oh man, that's amazing. And that's what inspires people like me to maybe at one day do that. You know what I mean?
Mm-hmm.
I don't start this thinking I'm going to become this person or that person. Like everybody is these days with podcasts. But I think what really inspired me, because I've always wanted to do something, but I never really knew what. And I always you always think whatever's trending is smart. Like, for instance, if you watch YouTube videos, there's always certain types of YouTube videos that pop off, and then people try to become YouTubers by doing that. And so when I stumbled upon Twisted History, because I knew you as an individual, and then I thought like that your perspective and point of view was very interesting. And then once you listen to Twisted History, so for instance, the first one I ever listened to was the Twisted History of gymnastics. And I did some gymnastics when I was a kid, and a few things here and there, but nothing has glamour to it as much a glitz as you think it is. But he spoke about I think she was 14 years old and she tried killing herself by drinking bleach. But then you went on to speak about a coach that coached in somewhere in Eastern Europe or something like that, and then went on to America and brought his approach to the American style. And just everything you delve into just has so many deep dives that are so interesting to me. The other day on you had a Righteous Women of History podcast, and you spoke about the girl who got stabbed at the tennis match in '93, and I'd never heard of that. And what really, I guess it's kind of like a elongated question, but what inspired you to start Twisted History? Because I feel like you have to take on such a role because you have so much to cover on certain subjects. And it's crazy to me, like the amount of facts you have. I know your wife searches all the facts for you. So I just want to first we'll say, how do you get into it? And then what keeps the inspiration and the drive for it?
So there's holes, right? Barstool has holes. One of the big holes is finance. And so people thought that I was a natural round peg for a round hole with that. And not the Davey day trader stuff, the more of a serious finance type stuff. The Davey day trader stuff is very profitable for the firm, and he does a fantastic job. He knows nothing about the markets, nor do I. But there's such a liability around that. There's such a compliance aspect to that didn't work for me. The food thing, obviously I'm building that as much as I can. As far as history goes, we didn't have that at Barstool. And I've always been just a history buff. And there are a few other guys at Barstool who are also history buffs. One of them is Chief out in Chicago. Chief and Eddie are out in Chicago. Donnie does, the Wonton Don, who travels all around, big history buff. You'd be surprised, like Smitty, huge history buff, stuff like that. So I said to myself, there are so many guys. What could be a bigger place to have to? I won't start a project. I should say this, Sam. I will not start a project without knowing that I can do 100 of them. Okay. So if somebody comes to me and says, hey, I'd like to start a podcast, and my podcast is going to be on gymnastics. I did a little gymnastics. I listened to you. I thought the bleach thing was great. The Mukina, and then, we can go into the Soviets and the 80 Olympics and stuff like that. I'd be cool. Gymnastics podcast. Awesome. Can you do 100 of them? I don't know if there's 100 podcasts once a week. I don't know if you can get 100 podcasts. That's 2 years worth of podcasts, right? I just did the math. What's a bigger, more amorphous subject than history, right? The beginning of this podcast that we're doing now is technically history. So if you look at the Twisted History of gymnastics, I did that before I did the Twisted History of World War I. And I didn't touch gymnastics until I did the Twisted History of bestiality. And I'm doing the Twisted History of cryptocurrency next week. And I just did the Twisted History of bad bitches with my wife. And then what's coming out today with Vibs is what the fuck did we just do? Jesus Christ, we do so much. We're doing the Twisted History of twins in 2 weeks. I'm doing the Twisted History of Dallas. There's nothing that we can't do because I don't have any rules. So to your point, I can start talking about Nadia Comaneci and then just pick up some small thing about her. Oh, we did the twisted history of robberies this week. So in the twisted history of robberies, for example, I said how some of the biggest bank robbers, sexy, bank robberies is sexy. You know what I mean? Smash and grab shit is boring, and cyber crime is boring, but bank robberies, especially in the old days, John Dillinger, Bonnie and Clyde, Babyface Nelson, they were all born out of the Great Depression. Let me make a left turn right now and talk to you guys about the Great Depression. In 1929, the stock market, I can do that in a half hour in the Great Depression. By the way, who made money in the Great Depression? I'll tell you who did. Babe Ruth. Babe Ruth made more than Hoover and said, well, I had a better year than Hoover did. Who else made money? Oh, J. Paul Getty. Did you know that his granddaughter got fucking abducted and he wouldn't pay the thing? Who else made? Oh, Joe Kennedy, biggest scumbag. He had his daughter lobotomized. This has nothing to do with robberies, but I think what we can do is take a historic topic, any one of them, and it doesn't have to be a big historic topic, fucking gymnastics isn't, and just tell people enough to make them seem like they're sitting next to an interesting person at a bar. Do you know what I mean? That they're not sitting in a classroom. And maybe when they leave, after listening to it for an hour and a half, they'll pull one thing out. Some poor bitch drank bleach. You pull that out. Somebody's going to be like, do you know that Babe Ruth said I had a better year than Hoover? That's why I make 5,000. Like, as long as you pull something like that out to make you seem more interesting, my job's done. And then hopefully they come back for another week. So that was the easy thing. And at one point, Dave was looking to hire another guy who's a stand-up comedian who does almost like a drunk history thing, like a real satirical take on history. So he called me into the office. He's like, I know that you're doing this history thing. Do you mind if I look at this other guy? This is Dave asking me. Before he became Dave. This was right as Twisted History was getting off its feet last year. And Dave's star has jumped up exponentially in the past 5-6 months. I said, Dave, it's the biggest fucking category in the world. I mean, if you have 4 football podcasts, you can have 14 history podcasts if you want. They wound up not hiring them, which was all fine with me. But even the gentleman up in Boston, Minihan, like he's doing a true crime thing, which has a historical bent to it. I could give a fuck less. You wish him the best of luck. I'll promote it if I can on my podcast. I just haven't listened to it yet. So, it's one of those things where as you're choosing a lane, be it in life or certainly at Barstool Sports, try to choose one that you can do 100 of. Right. I think that's kind of a rule of thumb, and you could change around 100 to whatever you want. If you're going to take a job, just do a job that you can do 5 years at. Oh, I can do 5 years of that. I can do 100 of that. And then kind of puts things into perspective.
That's one of the best answers I've had, because I try to think to myself, why am I doing this right now? It's not a money thing at all, but that's kind of why I picked this, because it's something that I just wanted to talk to people and about things that interest me and intrigue me. And what you were saying with your thing, when you can talk about this and then delve into that and then delve into that, you can be with the fucking coolest guy at the party. Like you could go from having nothing to listen to that, be like, hey, so like, oh, you're into gymnastics? Like, do you have any kind of like depression or anything like that? Like, have you heard about this? Like that might spark the depression again, but still, just don't talk to that person out.
Yeah, no, but I mean, and I also have the benefit of then I hosted a lot with this young man named Jeff Vibert, and I tried to do that because it's a little bit of a yin and a yang. Physically, I'm 6'5", 300 pounds. Jeff is 5'7", 130 pounds. Okay, so I'm twice Jeff Vibert. Jeff is 15 years younger than me. So I like to have that generational gap. But Jeff kindly steps aside every other podcast and lets me have another person. So I know nothing about hockey. Growing up in Brooklyn, we didn't have much hockey, as far as that one, as far as playing. And like I said, my parents weren't sports heads, with the exception of boxing, just because they're from the other side. So I had Rear Admiral from Spit and Chicklets come on, which is the biggest hockey podcast in the history of the world. And he kind of didn't tell me what it was like to be, across the blue line or anything like that. But we just went through all the big hockey stories. And Rear Admiral told him the only way that Rear Admiral can. He was filthy. And it was great. Casey Smith she's a vision. I find her to be lovely all the way around. She does a college football show for us. And I said, let's do Twisted History of the Heisman together. She's like, I know all the Heisman winners. Yeah, absolutely. I said, we're going to do the first 20 because it's a history podcast. She's like, I don't know a single one. She's like, do you mind if I just open up a bottle of wine and just hang out and learn and ask questions? And I loved that podcast. It's just Casey sitting down in her living room, in a nightie. No, I'm just kidding. But like she's just sitting down, having some wine, and we're just talking about people who won the Heisman 100 years ago. So there's a freedom to it that makes it non-formulaic, because I think once you do get into that formulaic type thing, which I don't think you have here, right? You'll battle rapper versus me versus some, underground hip hop artist that seems to be a little bit of a bigger breath. Because once you get formulaic, then you're an accountant again. Then you're sitting in and stamping accounts receivable and shit like that. And that makes me want to throw myself off a bridge.
No, 100%. I found myself starting with the battle rappers, and that was a great niche because I'm so knowledgeable. But then you can only talk about, like, if you're talking to a white guy about rapping, you can only talk about 8 Mile so many fucking times. You know what I mean? Like, so yeah, no, that's like, so also, like, in my history, I've cooked my whole life professionally. So I would love to, especially during this time, interview restaurant owners, because I know what it's like to kind of everything in between and running a restaurant, but then also the struggle during these times. I think that's a niche thing, but then not have that as my focus. And that's why I think what you said speaks in volumes to whether you're trying to be creative in artistry or whether you're just trying to get a career, whether it be, can you do 100 things of this, write 100 things of this, record 100 things of this, or can you work at it for 5 years? That's a beautiful answer, man.
I think so. Yeah. I'm good at this shit, huh?
You're fucking great at it. We'll say iconic. He's stroking his mustache from playing with a knife. I don't know to feel intimidated or aroused.
No, if you don't get this thing some muscle memory, it's a waste of time.
Yeah,
trying to be like a dastardly villain who's tying somebody to a fucking train track.
He's like, you could pass it, or you could be in like the Grand Budapest Hotel or something like that.
Yeah, or a gay pirate. Either way,
it's multifaceted. As long as you can do it 100 times.
Yes, exactly.
I want to delve in. I don't want to go crazy because if I'm so interested in it, but I just want you to speak on what it was like during 9/11. Maybe your morning at 9/11, because every morning was the same because it was your regular job, and just the turn of events that happened during that day. I know it's very vague and broad, but I
just did the numbers on Twisted History, and the Twisted History of 9/11, which was co-hosted with my wife, St. Anne, my wife Anne, love my life. That was the biggest episode that we've ever done by far. When I was first started at Barstool, we were 17 years removed from 9/11, and 9/11 was coming up. I said, I'm going to put some words down on paper. I'm a long form blogger. I think the average blog at Barstool might be 300 or 400 words. A lot of that is cut and pasted. I'm a long form guy. I'm like a 2,000 word guy. I like to tell stories. So I wrote my experience on 9/11. That was it. Reflections on 9/11. And I wrote it, and it wound up being maybe like 3,000 words or something. So it was a very long blog. And then I had my wife read it, because a lot of it's her story to tell. And we went over it. And I was just as tempted to hit delete after it was all done, because it's cathartic to write about shit, record shit, as I was to submit, because I had to submit it to an editor. And but I decided to hit submit. And what's crazy about this, and I've been a trader my whole life, trading big positions. I wasn't very good at it, but trading big positions and stuff that put a lot of blood in my stool. I don't have any hair. I lost my hair very young. Stressful type situations. But there's a different thing creatively, and I'm sure you've been through this either with yourself or with some artists you've talked to. When you put something that you put your heart into and you put it out to the general public, and somebody sends back, that was fucking terrible, it crushes you, man. And if somebody sends back, that was fucking terrible, and it was a top 10 list of girls Prince banged, that's okay. I get it. Apollonia doesn't look as good as maybe, Ariana Grande or something like that. I know I've mispronounced it. But if you put your heart into something and somebody sends it back to you, it's a fucking, like, I don't like to leave myself exposed. 9/11, my nose is wide open on that. So I wrote the story, and I'm telling you, man, 17 years, I didn't talk about this fucking thing except with my wife. The amount of positive feedback I got back, I was like, why the fuck didn't I do this sooner? And like the outpouring of love and all that kind of stuff. So I publish that same blog, Reflections on 9/11, every year on 9/11. So you guys can read that. They take it down. Maybe by now it's taken down, so people can't read it all year long. And then it goes back up on 9/11. So this year is the first year doing Twisted History. As 9/11 was approaching, I said, why don't I do it from an even more personal experience and have my wife do that, knowing for sure that she was going to get that same positive feedback. And so she sat down, she recorded it for a couple hours. We told the story, and she's so matter-of-factly about it. She really is a stud. I can't speak highly enough about my wife, and I'll keep speaking about it throughout this podcast. And the people fucking loved it, because if you're outside of New York and you're in a younger generation, you really don't remember it, or you don't remember it beyond like these accounts of people that you don't know. And I think with my job in Barstool, people feel like they sort of know me. Do you know what I mean? Like there's a friendly relationship more so than a follower relationship. I've been told that. I'm not saying that. And I feel like I'm friendly with a lot of my followers. So it's simpatico. So I started working on the floor of the American Stock Exchange right out of college. I went to the University of Notre Dame. I graduated from Notre Dame. I put off law school for a semester to go to work on the floor of the American Stock Exchange. I worked for a gentleman who was one of the hardest asses I've ever seen in my fucking life. His name is Emmer Carvey. I worked for him for a couple of years. All of a sudden, this cute little redhead came down to the floor. She worked on his New York Stock Exchange, the big boy exchange, for years before that. She's younger than me. She didn't go to college. She's been working there since high school. Winds up, it's his daughter. I'm terrified of him. I'm certainly fucking terrified of her. I start sleeping with her behind his back. I leave him to go work for JP Morgan, which is one of his biggest customers, and he loves it because that locks in the business for him going forward. Then I ask her to marry me. That was 24 years ago. Every Tuesday, we belong to an eating club called Windows on the World, which is on the top floor of one of the towers of the World Trade Center. And it was great. It was the greatest scene. It was the greatest view of New York City that you could ever want. So it was Emmer Carvey, who's my father-in-law. My wife would often be up there because she worked for his New York Stock Exchange. Her uncle, Bob Toomey, who was a great, great man, also worked for her father. And then a bunch of guys that she grew up in the business with. I had spent a couple of years with them, right? 6, 7 years with them, 8 years with them. But she grew up with them, right? They were at her like fucking high school graduation and stuff. So every Tuesday we do Windows of the World. Even after I'd left the firm and I went to work at JP Morgan, then I wound up working at Citigroup, which is a couple of blocks north of the World Trade Center, I would still go up for Tuesday morning breakfast as much as I could. My wife gets and my wife goes up every week because she's basically working on the floor for my father-in-law still on New York Stock Exchange. So she's there every week. She has some dental work done on Monday, so she decides to skip breakfast on Tuesday. She goes right down to the floor of the exchange. And I think, yeah, so I dropped her off. We drove in. We lived in Brooklyn at the time. Then I went up to my office. And then, so neither of us were up at breakfast that day. She should have definitely been there. I could have been there. But her dad, her uncle, and then the 8 guys she started the firm with were all there. And so the plane came in below them. So they were wiped out. And we didn't know that. But, you know, so she's south of the tower by a couple of blocks on the floor of the New York Stock Exchange. I'm north of the tower by more than a handful of blocks at 390 Greenwich for Citigroup. And we're trying to get to each other. And then I try to run down to get her along the West Side Highway when the second tower falls. So I get covered in ash. I almost grab a gun. And it's all these things that had happened during that day. And then we wind up like reconnecting. We went over to the east side of Manhattan. You know, the cell phones weren't working then. And you got to know that cell phones weren't that great then. And, you know, I walked across the Manhattan. She walked across the Brooklyn Bridge. We somehow met on the other side. And then we had to go and, you know, look for the bodies, and we wound up getting part of his jawbone and part of his hip bone later on. And there's all these like stories surrounding it and this real intimacy on what had happened with her going down and giving DNA tests and me going in to get my car with 6 inches of dust on it with hazmat suits bringing me in, all that kind of stuff. My father, who was a retired iron worker, like with fucking 2 fake knees and a fake hip, you know, signs up to work a fucking a bobcat to go like look for bodies. There's all this like personal stuff that jumps out with that old school New York thing that I was talking about before, right? Like, you know, I said I looked up and a twin tower all of a sudden lost a twin. You know, that you talk about iconic, I'll say it. Iconic looking at the New York skyline, taking that fucking subway in from Brooklyn to Manhattan every day for 4 years when I was in high school. And then for my whole life, whenever we were traveling in and out of high, like to see all that disappear. That's like, you know, that beats any Godzilla movie that you ever saw in your fucking life. So we had, you know, this right up until the point where they, you know, they didn't have any bodies. So we had to eulogize these guys at St. Patrick's Cathedral. And This bitch, my wife, gets up in front of like 4,000 people and she doesn't even drag the toe. She eulogizes her dad and her uncle and Mike Skooma and Tommy Sullivan and Bobby Sutcliffe and Pat Dickinson. She does all these guys while I am swollen up like a sumo behind it. You know what I mean? Like, like the intestinal fortitude. So there's a story behind every one of those little tidbits. And so I began telling them, and it wound up, we don't make any money off of, the podcast or anything like that. Buy a t-shirt if you'd like. But people want to hear that. Like, people would rather hear that than I like Mississippi State minus 5.5 points, or I just had the greatest yakitori Tori Shin last week. I'm writing about it now. It was fucking fantastic. Like, there's a realness to that. And I don't have a lot of those stories. I have a bunch of stories from the floor, which people are interested in and stuff. But 9/11 in particular was something that we could have kept close to the vest for the rest of our fucking lives. I mean, it almost tore the marriage apart, and, there was stuff going on afterwards. So to open that up and then have this positivity flood back in to where every time we'd open it up, it was death and ash and fucking bone fragments and, all that's, and planes hitting buildings and the smell of rocket fuel, and it tested for lung cancer. Like, where that used to be that, and then have all this positivity rush in. Fuck, I can't thank Barstool enough for giving me that platform to have, and I'm telling you right now, to have 5,000 people reach out to me the next day. 5,000 people reach out to me. Just, like, I couldn't get to it. And I try to get to everything. I can't get to the shit around 9/11. I can't get to everybody telling me that now, 2 years later, removed from me writing the blog this year at 9/11. I won't be able to get to all the people saying, I read this every year. Thank you so much for doing this. It reminds us of what had happened. And people tend to forget, there's that never forget thing that people do, but people do. It's no longer on the front page of the Daily News every year. It's no longer on the front page of the Post, which I think is fucking disgraceful. So there's like a never forget type thing that's a trite little saying, but I think people tend to, the red bandana story about the dude with the red bandana who's running in and pulling bodies out. People take those and they use those as stories that help them never forget. And now to be put into the pantheon as some of those heroes, telling the story of my wife's family and my friends who had all, got, wiped out that day. That's a fucking honor. So even though it's a very negative thing, you'd ask me from the onset, you're like, mind if I ask about 9/11? I'm like, yeah, I mean, well, why the fuck not? Because now all 9/11 was for the 17 years before that was us avoiding putting on a TV. Because imagine your dad got hit by a car and died. God forbid. I don't even know if your father's still alive. I apologize for bringing that up. Let's say my father got hit by a car and died. And let's say that happened on May 3rd. And every May 3rd, you turn on the TV and all they show is the car hitting your father. Like, that's how my wife felt every time she saw a fucking plane hit into the building, every 9/11. Like, they kept showing it, and I was, like, I'm like, oh, we won't eat, like I say, innocent stuff, like, no hummus on 9/11, no Middle Eastern food, like that type of shit. You try to rub it off and be kind of whatever. But, reading the names, the reading of names, like my son has gotten to do it. My son, he was the youngest kid to ever read the names. He was 10 when he went down. And so when he read his grandfather's name, and he had 10 other names to read, and they gave him the fucking bar exam. I mean, some doozies, and he pured it, fucking throwing BBs everyone. And at the end, he got to mention his grandfather's name. So, we grab onto some positives, but one of the most positive parts about it was Barstool giving me a platform to open up, tell the story, and having stoolies come back to me such positive feedback.
I'm just gonna, my last touch on it is every year I actually kind of revisit it. So I always find whatever recordings of the day, because during then I was young. I think I was 8 or 9 years old, and from Canada. And so I used to always watch Howard Stern's take on it because it was in real life. Take. And wonderful so that's the closest to the two largest take that I could ever see. And that's a wonderful take as well. And it's in video, but watch that, but also listen to the Twisted History of 9/11. It'll get you into any episode of Twisted History. It'll get you into it, but the perspective is so different. And Large's wife's perspective is so different. And you've mentioned her, and I want to mention her because as a fan, I know she does the research for your show. And myself, I try to do research, and I'm like, going all over the place because I try to base it off of like things that I'm inspired by. And man, I just want to say kudos to her. I don't think I've anything like
Let's not give this bitch too much credit. All right. It's possible of it. So what Annie will do is I'll say, hey, Annie, we're going to do Twisted History of Robbery. She'll go out and she'll get like 60 pages worth of stuff and she'll footnote it and whatnot. And she'll send it to me and kind of, rough and never changed into her own words, never tried to change into my words because it just doesn't work. Right. And then so she'll do that over the course of a couple of days. She'll stay up at night, just kind of do it as a labor of love at night. She doesn't get paid for it. She handles the social too, by the way. And she designed this last concert t-shirt, all that shit. So, and then I'll take it and I probably spend that's the only bad thing about doing a history podcast. People call you out. People call you out when you say stuff wrong. And I want people to call me out and then I'll do corrections the next day. Like I want to know, but you can't get up there and consistently be wrong. So there's a lot of double checking. So by the time it gets in front of me, it's usually pretty tight. I double check a lot of stuff. And then it takes me about 6 hours a week coming up with a 2-hour script. And it's because I have to touch on all these points and it can get conversational. And then the script, by the time we rush through it, even with the conversations, even if it's a script that I'll talk for 2 hours on to practice, it'll probably be more like an hour and a half, an hour and 45 minutes. And that's with ads. We're lucky enough that we have a bunch of people who advertise with us, which is the end game for Barstool, obviously. So she's, and on top of it, we have 3 kids, expensive.
It's quite a life to juggle because it seems like what is so interesting because you speak about how you seem personable. I can tell that you're a huge foodie. You like to drink. I'm both big into those, but all I have is 2 cats and a girlfriend. So you have a wife. You got to maintain that relationship, especially after 22 years. And then 3 kids and then multiple jobs within one job. Yeah. And you also seem to balance your enjoyment for life. So how do you do all of that?
Yeah, well, I met one of the first interviews that I did. So I'm an old school hip hop guy.
Great.
Always
Talk
have
on
been.
that.
So like when I went to high school on the Lower East Side, we were around it was 2nd Avenue and 2nd Street. We were around the corner from Video Music Box, which was this old school music video show. And it was, I think Ralph McDaniels was the host and whatnot. So people used to go to Video Music Box all the time. So walking out of high school, I'd see like Eric B. and Rakim walk out and Flavor and fucking Run DMC and Cool Mo D, Big Daddy Kane, like all these like, I don't know. These are Rushmore type guys from back in the day, like KRS-One and Boogie Down Productions would come out. And it was great for me. So, but you never met them. Like sometimes they'd have some promotional stuff with them signing, but it was all, pretty well secured out that a local or a regular high school kid wouldn't all of a sudden walk up and have a drink with Cool Mo D. So now I'm doing my first celebrity interview at Barstool, and it's Reverend Run. It's from Run DMC, and his wife was there, and they were promoting their sitcom. There's sitcoms.
Like Run's House. Yeah.
So I think it was moderately terrible, but
he used to have, at the end of every episode, he had a BlackBerry curve in a bathtub, and he'd give like an inspirational quote for the episode.
Yeah. So Willie Colon, the guy, Willie's younger than me, but also, has a great appreciation of who Run DMC and who Run was and stuff. And Willie is more, at the time, was just better at interviewing. Now I'm so much better than him. It's not even fucking close. I hope he listens to this. But Willie and I, we had to do it remotely. We had to do it up at Sirius's headquarters as opposed to the Sirius studio in Barstool. So the way that we had sat down, there was Run and his wife to my right-hand side, and then myself, and then Willie almost behind me, the way that I was turned to look at him. And then it's impossible for 2 men to attack one or two and not be making eye contact, to know that you're double dutching in or out. It really ups the ante with trying to interview people. And I come to know that now because I was in awe of kind of like sitting down and talking to Run from Run DMC. So, I'd be vapor locked on him and Willie's stuck on his own and we wouldn't be able to go. But one of the things that Run had said was that at his worst, he was the worst. He's like, so I don't want to put that in front of me. I take my wife wherever I go. That's what he says. And it wasn't until like, at first I thought it was to avoid temptation. So he wouldn't just be getting hand jobs all over the fucking place. But I think it's just, he loves his wife. And so he wants to share stuff with his wife. And he also doesn't want her to miss out on a lot of stuff that he's getting, unless it's something that she has to miss out on. And I find that to be true in my life too. Unfortunately, I'm going to be down in Dallas in the bubble for the Canelo Alvarez, Billy Joe Saunders fight in 2 weeks. I can't take Annie. I just can't. 2 weeks after that, I'm going to be down in New Orleans. I'm going to be judging bacon and chicken categories for Hogfest 2021 with Ben Mintz. And then the people at the World War II Museum down there, New World War II Museum, Tom Hanks helped design it and all that shit. Tom Hanks makes everything legit, right?
Except for his
They're going
son.
to give us a private tour for Twisted History. I'm taking Annie. We're getting some fucking sitters and we're going out. You know what I'm saying? Like, so
pick and choose.
Yeah. I like whenever I can, I go out of my way to make sure, because she never does what I would be doing, because she doesn't have, she was a broker on the floor of the New York Stock Exchange. I was a clerk. She outranked me. She made more money than me. Then I went upstairs and I became a trader. She'd never gone upstairs. So our relationship, she drives everywhere. I sometimes get out and let her parallel park. We don't have like traditional roles. I do most of the cooking and shopping and stuff like that. Our relationship has been one of equals for a long time. So like having her sharing experiences. So when I do the boozing and the food, a lot of times the people taking that footage is my wife. So I'm spending it with her. Like, you know what I mean? Like that's fucking quality time that I'm telling you, 90% of the couples that we know would fucking kill to do that. Like, oh, what are you guys doing? What did you guys do this week? Oh, we went to a little league game. We did all that kind of stuff. But then we also had to go to this yakitori place, and we also had to go down to New Orleans. So we also did, like, I think that helps out. So the kids, it's tough to bring my kids in. So sometimes that's a little bit of a sacrifice, and I'm constantly making up for it. And so I try to be everywhere that I can for my kids as much as possible. But is like that happy life, happy wife bullshit. That's not true. But if you're going to marry somebody that you don't want them to be a part in all the good shit that you're going to be part of, then maybe you shouldn't get fucking married. Yeah. And I'm a big fucking fan of that. If you're still about to get married, by the way, if anyone's listening to this and you're looking to get away for that weekend, that's human. That's fucking human. Just to get away. I tell her when I'm traveling without her, just to quiet. You know what I mean? Like, what did you do today? I was like, oh, I wound up sleeping 12 hours. Just to quiet. I get that. But if every time you have fun, you're going to try and do it with a point where she's not around, I don't know, man. Go play golf and have stuff without her. Like, make sure you can't do everything together. I get it. But do you know what I mean? Like, there's a balance. So I try and I really like my family. So I try to get them involved as much as possible. And I think they know that. They know that, and I think that makes my life a lot easier, and as a result, a lot more enjoyable.
Another great answer. You keep knocking them out of the park, man.
All day.
Iconic. Okay, food. This would be a whole other hour I could speak on, so I'll try to pinpoint it. Sure. Okay, what can I do? Your top 3 sandwiches right now. I'll say mine first. I'll say a classic banh mi with the pate and the Vietnamese cold cuts, not like a bullshit whitewashed pork belly version, although I love pork belly. And then I'll go a po' boy from New Orleans with beef rather than like the fried oysters. And just to show you I'm a big fan of Welsh rarebit.
Oh, Welsh rarebit. Pull that out of my ass, right? Yeah.
He's in there's a show on Barstool called The Dozens, which is a great trivia show. And Large kills it with the food topics on that.
Yeah, I tend to. The bar, yeah. I can't do any sports. These guys are rain men with fucking sports, though. So I appreciate that they give me the opportunity. You get to do niche categories. I've been doing sandwiches and fucking crushing it. It's tough. Like whenever and I think you know this too, as being a food guy. People ask you what your favorite dish is. That's a Sophie's choice.
It's the time being. I find it's like what you're craving is always what kind of or like a. If it's where you are too.
My answer is never a Popeye's chicken sandwich. Like if you're going to say what's your favorite sandwich, I think there's nothing better. You know what? There's nothing better than a fried chicken sandwich. Fried chicken sandwich done right is a fucking thing of beauty. And Popeye's has the potato bun and the mayonnaise and fucking pickles and stuff like that. What they do is fine, but that I try to pull away from that shit as much as possible and cook as much as possible because I think it makes a difference. But Jesus Christ, like if you come over my house on Christmas, I host everybody on Christmas Day, and I just do a simple Coca-Cola glazed spiral ham. I do a simple Coca-Cola glazed spiral ham, and then I make homemade buttermilk biscuits. And so as soon as you show up to the house, instead of an appetizer, we just have a spiral ham, buttermilk biscuits, and I make my own pimento cheese. And my pimento cheese is off the fucking charts. So you're having a hot biscuit with a couple of slices of spiral ham. You're having it with a little dollop of pimento cheese. You throw a couple of cornichons on there just for the acid to cut through the whole fucking thing. A couple of mustards around if you want to fuck with mustards. Stone ground, brown mustard, Dijon. That's it. Something as simple as that, like sitting down next to my dad and we're throwing down, like there's an idea. Christmas is my birthday. I'm born on Christmas Day. So like there's an idea that, having something the way that you want it on a special day or around. I don't know if somebody says, are you kidding me? Spiral ham on a fucking biscuit with pimento cheese? Yeah. On Christmas Day in my house is the best fucking sandwiches you ever had. You know what I mean? And to your point, I used to go to this place in Chinatown that's since gone down. It was a jewelry store. You walk through the jewelry store, and in the back of the jewelry store, they made banh mi's. And with the pates, with the terrines, not with the fucking pork. Nothing wrong with the pork belly and sliced pear that they're doing at fucking Num Pang and stuff. I love that sandwich. But you're right, like the original type of Vietnamese banh mi's. So I've had some very good sandwiches all the way around. I'll tell you what I fell in love with. This fucking Jardinera that JP Graziano's. They're one of my sponsors.
Quick plug. Promote it right now.
But
Go for it.
But you're there. You're up there. Yeah. I forget what the fucking Taste of Chicago, I believe. JP Graziano's. I'm like, how does this sandwich shop? And he's such a nice guy. He's a fucking nice guy. So he's got an Italian deli, and an Italian hero is an Italian hero. You get the right bread, you cut it at the right, they make it nice and thin. Ham only has one side. It's so fucking thin. You get the right little mix there. It's tough to fuck up. They do a Jardinera. JP Graziano's. I'm not even going to give you the fucking thing, but it's fantastic. So as I go along, a sausage and peppers at a fucking San Gennaro street fair in downtown in Little Italy, right? Wrapped in the tinfoil, greasy as fuck. And right afterwards, you're getting a paper bag full of hot Zeppelis with enough fucking powdered sugar on it that when you breathe in and you're eating it, it actually chokes you. Like, I like the idea of that sandwich. Do you know what I mean? With a glass of cold, cheap red wine that someone gives you in a paper cup because you're at an Italian street festival. That sandwich sometimes turns me on more than the Black Label burger at Minetta Tavern, which has its place, but it's so I like food, and I like the experiences around food, and I like the neighborhoods, and I like this, like being out in San Diego last weekend, like having lengua and having cabeza and having this thing called palala is the roof of the mouth at this place, Tacos El Gordo in Chula Vista, I think it is. I can't even tell you if it was that good. All I know is that it was fucking fantastic, right? Because I was sitting there and it was sunny out and all that kind of shit. So
I think it's all memories. It's the same as if you ask somebody, like top 5 albums on a desert island. For me, it's like certain parts of my life or certain emotions I embark. Like, this is like a humble brag, but like I had paella on the beaches in Frigliana in a mountain town in Spain. And so like when I think of paella, that's what I think of. But then also for Vietnamese food, I've never been to Vietnam, but in any Chinatown, if it has chairs that are about like a foot and a half tall and there's a little kid running around, I'm eating there. That's where I want to eat. But absolutely. Whereas I've had beautiful rabbit heart at the best sommelier in Canada's place, but they all are equal in a sense. Like, I love a junior bacon cheeseburger from Wendy's just as much as I love like fresh beef tartare from like a cow that was raised and aged and stuff. Like, food is such a beautiful thing.
My aunt owns a pub in London, and they serve, it's like a roll is almost like one of those Portuguese water rolls, but has a little more of a crispiness to it. And so it's one of those round rolls that has a puff to it. It's almost like a ball.
Okay.
And she would just cut it in half. You know that English mustard that's got that heat to it. Just Coleman's English mustard.
I got 3 jars in the fridge.
Yeah. And I was in McSorley's last week, and it winds up the McSorley's hot mustard. They give it to you liverwurst and crackers. The McSorley's hot mustard is just Coleman's mustard powder mixed with their light ale. That's it. No fucking vinegar, no nothing. And I like the fact that exists. My aunt used to just cut it in half, she would slice ham and just put it on this fucking hard roll, a little bit of Coleman's mustard. She'd take a knife, she'd whack the top of the fucking roll. It's crispy, so it made like a little crevice in it. And inside that crevice, she would put a slice of raw onion, almost like a shark's fin, and then give it to these guys who were just sitting down, eating pickled eggs out of a fucking jar, the corner of the bar, and eating ham sandwiches with raw onion. And when I saw that when I was a kid visiting, I was like, that is fucking disgusting. Now as an adult, I mean, the bar's no longer there. She's just holding on and stuff like that. Man, I'd have that all. I'd fly there for that right now. I'd pay a couple $1,000s just to go and get one of my Aunt Teresa's fucking sandwiches right now. So I think it's equal part taste and equal part experience for me.
It's exactly what you say. In the same time when I was in Spain, I had this, funny enough, a Caesar salad, but it was in this restaurant that was run by this lady and her daughter. And it was like so tiny and so homey. Mm-hmm. And I think, is that the best Caesar salad I've had? But I could never tell until I go back. You know what I mean? But maybe they won't be open, and maybe that's fine, because at least in my head, that was the best Caesar salad I ever had because of the time and place, right?
Yeah, I mean, there's stuff you can't go wrong with. So you'll send people for sandwiches here, and you'll send people for sandwiches there, but you can't send a person to that place in Spain and expect them to have the same experience.
No.
So I write this weekly blog. It's called I Want You Inside of Me. And that's the blog. And I remember I'd whispered it into the ear of a fucking hero once. I want you inside of me. And my wife had overheard it. She's like, that is the fattest, gayest thing you've ever said. I said, I don't care. And by the end of the meal, I was covered in fucking mayo. So it really was like a gangbang. I want you inside of me. So I write something, and I don't do what Dave does. Dave will go to a pizza parlor that he never tried, because it's a pizza parlor, right? And he'll give them a 5 and shut the place down, or give them an 8 and make the place his day. I go to places that I know are good, and then I write about it. I tell you to go, and can you do 100 of those? You're fucking damn right. I could do 100 of those. I could do 100 of those standing on my fucking head. You know what I mean? I'll fly up and go to Joe Beef tomorrow. It's one of those things where anything I can talk about going and getting a fresh loin of foie and searing it here with a little bit of, grape and doing a fucking foie gras PBJ. Like I can do 100 of those fucking things. So that fits the criteria too with the food, the food content. I don't know if I'm going to have to go video with it because people aren't reading as much.
I love it. It's pissing me off because I'm in Ottawa, and Ottawa is the nation's capital, but it's tiny compared to other cities in Canada. And in small cities, there's food trends. So right now we're at the stage where everybody does tacos with a garnish of radish and jalapeno, and nobody even eats the fucking jalapeno or radish. Right. And Nashville chicken sandwiches are the only chicken sandwiches. And we haven't hit birria yet. And I saw you the other day, you had some birria tacos, and I've been just seeing birria, and it's just been like, I've been like scratching my neck. Like, I need this. And
I put it out there, the Mexican French dip. I put that out there just in the title. And somebody said, nobody read the blog. And people read the blog. I shouldn't say that, but the people who complain about it are like, Mexican French dip. How could you be so disrespectful? Did you read the blog? Did you read the fucking blog when I told you about the people in fucking the Yucatan burying a goat and then having this fortified consomme? That's what the birria is. It's the fucking consomme. Like, I know more about fucking birria than I've forgotten more about it since I wrote about it than this guy would ever know. And so you got to tread lightly sometimes when you're going over some cultural stuff too. And these bastardized versions of birria, they're just as fucking delicious. Do you know what I mean? Like I go try to find one that's fucking made with goat. You can't, but you'll never find one with chicken, but it's like a slippery slope. I want to try it all. Like I really do. I want to try it all at least once, unless I have an allergy to it. I'm trying it at least twice. I think it was Andrew Zimmerman who tries everything twice. Like that was his thing. It's not enough to say you'll try it once, to try it twice. And so I'm always a try it twice guy. And there's very few things that I don't like.
And that makes a lot of sense too. And also, even if you don't like it, it's a big respect thing too. I remember earlier on in life, my dad, who worked traveling around internationally with schools. So he was always meeting new people. And a big thing of respect is wherever you travel, they'll give you whatever they think is the best cut of meat or whatever their family does traditionally the best. And if you scoff at it, that's almost like a disrespect You know what I
Sure.
mean? Like it's, and then also Anthony Bourdain always speaks about, even if you don't know the language, you can kind of get to know somebody by eating food with them, even if you don't speak. And so, for instance, I had balut, which is the fermented duck egg. It's
Yep.
gross. My friends made me do it. But when
Mhm.
I tell any Filipino person I meet that I've eaten a balut, the respect level goes up
Right.
tenfold. Hey, you know? And
Yeah.
like,
No, I mean, it's some of it's a rite of passage, you know, like some of it is a rite of passage, and there's a couple of things on the list. So Balut's a toughie, like Balut's a toughie because you're eating the
especially if you
embryo.
know what it is. Like if you
Yeah,
didn't know what it was, maybe, but I've seen so many videos of people being disgusted by it that
yeah, yeah. It's one of those ones where what the hell do people they stay away from? What's the one everyone hates? Fucking durian.
yes, yeah.
During, yeah, and then that other thing, strumming, the blue, it's that fermented fish that comes from
Oh, a lutefisk.
lutefisk, which is that ammoniated one that's
Yes.
like packed in lye. Then there's also the one that's in the can called like something strumming.
Yeah, I think it is strumming. I think it's like
Is it
red
something
herring
like that?
strumming or something like that.
Yeah, and Vibs had it for lowering the bar. I said, I'll do it. You know, like I'll do all that shit. And that's why I don't get on a lot of Vibs is on all Twisted Histories. I don't get on a lot of lowering the bars because he'll give me something. I'll be like, oh, that was okay. Whereas everyone else like fights is throwing up and Casey is, oh lordy. But when he had opened up that strumming or that lutefisk type thing, it filled the whole two stories that we're in. And I didn't get it because when I was just back after COVID, and that's what I lost my sense of taste and my sense of smell for 2 months, and I was like, oh my god, I I think I'd rather lose my hearing. Like like I really I need my eyesight obviously, but sense of smell more so than taste because I smell everything before I eat it. Anything before I put it in my mouth, I bring to my nose. Right? You're doing yourself a disservice by not trying to get everything. And so that was a scary touch and go thing for me. I'm glad to
Oh
report that
man.
I'm back to almost 100%.
Especially with you too. It's funny you say that. My girlfriend always says she always watches me eat because she says I always stare at the food, but I always say I'm
Uh-huh.
looking for the perfect bite. You know what I mean?
Yeah.
Like I want to attack. Like I need to have like everything in here, and it needs to be the right bite. And yeah,
Surströmming, Swedish for
surströmming.
sour herring. It's a lightly salted fermented Baltic Sea herring. It is fucking terrible. Surströmming. It's a fermented fish. Please go out there. I've had that, more than twice, and I'm not going back again. It's just it has no. And same thing, lutefisk. It has nothing to it. It's not an acquired taste, although some claim it is. But that one's a tough one. That's
Yeah,
that,
there's
that's
certain
that's a
ones. There's
tough one.
certain points in food where you're just
Yeah.
like, really, like I wouldn't do the maggot cheese. I don't know if you've seen the maggot
Yeah,
cheese.
yeah, the maggot cheese.
I don't
I
know if
mean,
I could like I'll eat fried bugs and stuff like that, but I don't know,
oh,
you
I
know.
love them. Chapulines. I'm a big grasshopper guy, but I think there's 10 foods out there. Let's call it 10 foods that everyone kind of knows about that are exceptions to the rule. One, and anything that hurts.
Yeah.
Like if you're going to give me something that's going to hurt me twice on the way in and on the way out, I love a little heat. I do. I like a little heat. Rob O'Neill, the gentleman who shot Osama bin Laden, he just developed his own hot sauce. He sent me a bottle of it. I don't think it's for big production yet. You can only buy it for like $100 a bottle, but keep your eye out for it because it is hot and it is as fruity and tasty as any hot sauce I've ever had. So I can take heat, but some of these other challenges, like the Pocky Hot Chip Challenge, where it's just basically fiberboard just made up of pure capsaicin, fuck yourself with that. Those are the exceptions to the rule.
Yeah.
Do not try twice. I don't feel like hurting myself.
Yeah, I don't want to do a cinnamon challenge just for fun.
Yes.
Well, man, thank you so much for being on. Like I have so many more things I could speak to you about or ask you about. If you'd be willing to come on in the future, we could maybe do
Sure, bud.
an episode on food in a certain place or something. But then thank you
Absolutely.
so much. He's got children to attend to. He's got to help his son with a science project,
I do.
and he's got to keep putting out more amazing podcasts. So you know,
bet. Yeah. So every Wednesday, Podfathers and Twisted History drops. For those people who are into that, every Friday, I Want You Inside of Me drops on the blog. So those are the things that you can keep an eye out. NASCAR, I just do. I'm doing like an electric chair this weekend to watch Talladega, and then anytime there's a boxing event, I preview it the day before. So that's what I keep people up on. Than other random stuff. The Barstool Breakfast Morning Show is in plans to transfer to a Barstool Breakfast daily YouTube show. So we'll be video content as opposed to radio content. So that's in the wind as soon as all these, as soon as more of the COVID stuff's out. Because to have people inside the office all the time for a full lineup is probably shooting ourselves in the foot until everyone's vaccinated. So that's it with me. But it was a pleasure coming on. If you need me again,
I would love it. And also, if upon that, just follow him on Instagram and Twitter at Large Barstool. If you go to barstoolsports.com and you look up the bloggers, all of his blogs will be under his name, Large. And yeah, man, I really look forward to hopefully having you on in the future. And once again, I can't tell you how much I appreciate this enough. Before I forget, my brother, who's not into social media or anything at all and hates on everything that you send him, he made when I told him I had you because I got him into your podcast, he's like, tell him that a construction worker and just a good guy from Muskoka, Canada, Ontario, Canada, listens to his podcast. I was like, okay, man. And before he hasn't given me feedback on the podcast in months, but then once he heard about you, he's like, just tell him, man, tell him that I listen. I was like, okay, Liam Radford listens to you, Large. Just want to
Liam Radford is my top 5 favorite listeners. Even before I met you, I knew he was out there. My dad's construction. My brother's a local 3 electricians. I can't drive a nail, but that's how I grown up. So I couldn't be more grateful for the amount of people, for the breadth that Barstool has reached. So we have fans, we have listeners, fans, we have followers and listeners and friends like that all around, and it's fantastic. So thank him for listening and stuff. Tell him to buy a fucking t-shirt.
Maybe I will. Maybe I'll tell him to buy me a t-shirt. I don't know. We'll see. He makes money. I'm an artist, so I don't make anything. You know what I mean?
Yeah, struggling.
But yeah, man, appreciate you, dude. And hey, in the future, I have a friend whose mom makes her own garam masala straight from India. If you ever want that sent over for a little gift.
Absolutely, I fuck with the garam masala. Sure,
it's
she
the
makes her own?
best. Yeah, it's so amazing. Straight from India.
Right.
He goes home once a year. But yeah, and then if COVID ever ends, I'm coming to your house for some biscuits and spiral ham with some pimento.
I don't remember inviting you, but I guess so.
Bring
Liam with you.
Okay. Right? So I'll just steal his ID. We sound alike.
Right. Absolutely.
All right, man. Thank you so much. I'm going to end the recording. I'm going to thank Large again. Thank you for listening. Keep tuned in. We're really gaining something right here. So thanks, folks. Appreciate y'all. Peace out.